Hi, this is Joseph.
Hi, this is Isaac.
And we are back to do a political episode, as distinct a little bit from our philosophical, historical ones. But we will try to do something different than what you'll see on the TV stations like Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. We will try to give some historical bent, which I have not seen thus far in the political commentary on Joe Biden's debate with Donald Trump last week. We are doing this today on July 7th.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a week and a few days since the famous debate between those two, and now I'll give it over to Isaac just for initial thoughts and comments, and we will have a general conversation on the subject.
So what we saw on this debate stage is two old men that are utterly disqualified for the job that they are seeking to either regain or retain. Now, the kind of job that they are pursuing is kind of unique in history, in the sense that they are single executives, unitary executives, but that do not derive their legitimacy from divine right to rule, or at least not direct divine right, and it's an elected position, which somewhat complicate things when we go into historical comparisons. Usually, heads of republics that start showing sign of senescence are being replaced by their own party, because their own party does not want to be discredited. And usually, republics have all sorts of mechanisms to make sure that this type of that they are removed from power even before their term is up. For instance, a senile prime minister of a Westminster-styled parliamentarian democracy would simply fall from power real quick if his party is not smart enough to remove him. Now, kings who rule by divine right are somewhat different because they are ruled by divine right. Therefore, they in essence own their position. Therefore, they cannot be removed. But what often happens, as in the famous case of King George III, a regent is appointed to actually rule in their name. What happens in our case, we have someone who is not. Well, clearly, we came to believe that the supporters of both candidates clearly believe that in some sense they own the position of the president, but they are not, but not by divine right. So what do we do in this case? Well, the only good comparison is the job of the Roman Emperor. While I'm usually reluctant to make the comparison between the Roman Empire and the United States, because the United States was deliberately designed to avoid the faults of the Roman Empire and try to preserve the Republic as long as we can, we're clearly in a stage in which we are starting to emulate some of the faults of the empire. And one of these faults, and no, I'm not talking about affluence or decadence. The Republic was plenty affluent and plenty decadent. I'm not talking about. And we are not particularly decadent society. If you are, by your leave, I'm not talking about inequality, which is a completely modern phenomenon, modern measure. No ancient society believed that equality is a measure of a good society, at least not equality of wealth. But we're talking about our political faults, and one of the political faults is that our legislature is abdicating his responsibilities. Our parties become personalist parties, and the personalities become less and less actually worthy of the support of their supporters. And in this case, what we have is one person, as somebody says, one candidate who is senile and another who is demented.
Let's talk about the senile demented, possibly.
Yes.
Joe Biden. I'm going to play one clip of the beginning of the debate. I think this was around 10 minutes in, and this is when everyone kind of freaked out. As I say on the podcast, let's play this cut.
make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President.
No.
You see here in the end that he kind of almost saves him, because I feel like he would have gone on for another few minutes, but Jake Tapper interrupted. Thank you, President. But now, when I saw this, and I haven't seen the whole debate because it's a bit cringe-inducing, but I have seen this highlight and a few others. When I saw this, my immediate reaction was, oh my freaking goodness, this is the worst debate moment, possibly the worst debate in the history of recorded debates in this country, possibly ever. I can't imagine the fate of a political career changing so drastically in such a short period of time with any parallel in the history of the country or the world. When could you fathom a political career of a person without a violent death being experienced?
Mm-hmm.
In 90 minutes, where beforehand there was an even shot, opinion polls, betting polls, the intelligentsia in the country, the media, everyone kind of putting things at an even shot, to the immediate reaction to this, a Titanic sinking, bumping into the iceberg, Battle of Waterloo and Leipzig combined, the fall of everything. This sort of thing was the greatest shock that our political system, I think, has seen in such a brief period of time, insofar as kings have often been overthrown, like you mentioned before, if we're comparing us to the monarchs. We've never been at this late at a campaign primary where you already have one candidate being all but anointed and his own party conspiring behind his back to dethrone him. I don't think we've seen that in 250 years.
Yes. No, we didn't. I don't believe we did. We had maybe in the intermediate period between the War of 1812 and the stabilization of the Whig Party. Maybe we saw something on the Whig side of things, because the Whig Party was always a mess. There is a possibility that President Zachary Taylor was assassinated. That his death was some people speculated poisoning. But no, I have never seen something like that. Not by a person's own party.
And we probably cannot find that many parallel examples outside the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So this is fairly unique, I would suggest.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of a violent death or a violent battle, the fate of and he still might win this after this, in which case we'll have to redraw. But assuming Biden's a candidate and he loses, which
Mm-hmm.
I think those two are the most likely scenarios. Let's actually talk about that for a moment. I think that they're not going to replace Biden, and I think that there is a good chance he'll lose, although the chance is that he still might win after this debacle. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
My thought was like this. So we have a few factions on the Democratic side of things. So in the media corner, the media has an interest in maximum chaos. Their interest actually align with Trump being the president, because Trump bring chaos being clicks, advertising, people watching the latest thing, especially the kind of people who tend to tune in to MSNBC, etc. et al. So so their interests aligned with Trump, with a new Trump presidency. So don't take the media's calls for Biden's retreating from the race, or even resigning the presidency, in good faith. That's one thing. Another thing. And I suspect that if Biden resigns from the candidacy, the Democratic Party would lose anyway, unless they have a really, really, really attractive candidate. And I'm sorry, Gavin Newsom is not it, because the Democratic Party was essentially exposed as lying to the American people. Lying to the American people about the competency of the person who is effectively who is the closest thing an American party has to a head. So,
before we get to the lying to the American people and the cover-ups, is there anyone in the current Democrat bench? You mentioned Gavin Newsom as someone who's not going to make it.
There's the governor of Pennsylvania, Joe Shapiro. There's the governor of Colorado, is Jared Polis. There's people talk about Michigan, the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. I don't think that she'll do it. We never have the Democrats, successfully nominate a woman that actually win the presidency. I think that they would make the miscalculation that from Hillary Clinton, and they will, in which they would say, okay, the experience of Hillary Clinton proves that this country is not will not vote for a woman, or not, at least not a woman on a Democratic ticket, which I don't know if this is true. I think that this is underestimating this country, but another point is Kamala Harris is completely unfit for office. She's I don't know if the public perception of her is as a fool and as a buffoon and many other things besides. She's extremely unpopular. Who else is there? There's the government of there's a whole slew of governors, very ambitious, moderate Democrat governors of all sorts of swing states. Each and every one of them would be a relatively good choice. The problem is you're starting the primaries all over again, right before the convention, and it's the election is right around the corner. It is in November, so you'll need to lock this down beforehand. Everybody would. So if tomorrow and by the way, the Conference of Democratic Governors already assembled, and they already said that they support Biden, which means instead of choosing, which they missed the opportunity to choose an agreed upon alternative candidate. So yeah, it seems like Biden will be the president, and why will be the presidential candidate in 2024. And why is that? It's because the Democratic Party cannot afford to change horses. Because if they change horses, the Biden campaign money is gone, the Biden campaign apparatus is gone. It's a new candidate, and you'll have the albatross around your neck of having lied to the American people. So this is not a question. The only reason that the media advocates it is to alleviate themselves from being tarred in the same to damage control the fact that they also lied to the American people about Biden's acuity and fitness for office, and also because they want a Trump presidency. And I'm saying that as someone who does not want another Trump presidency. I think Trump is also a dangerous person. He's actively a dangerous person, and I think that his grievance from his loss from 2020 still haunts him, and will dramatically change the way he governs. Do I believe that if Trump wins, it's the end of democracy? No, by no chance. We had more dangerous and more capable people being elected president, and nobody ever managed to kill this old lady.
Let's now compare a little bit to previous regimes that had people on top that were very old and possibly feeble. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of a few empires, but I want to get to the Roman. I was thinking of Ottoman emperors that were extremely old and famously out of it to
mm-hmm.
the point of being crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps some Chinese emperors. But you mentioned before Roman, and I want to look in a moment at Byzantine, but if we were doing Roman, what emperors kind of spring to mind immediately?
Tiberius, definitely. Tiberius was considered senile. He essentially retired from government a few years before his death. He was not, as a matter of fact, senile, a mistake that actually cost his the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, Sejanus, his life and the life of his entire family, when he thought to just gently push off the old man and install himself as emperor. And what happened to Sejanus and to his entire family was that the old man still has all his teeth. But
yeah, so I guess this is always an issue with whenever, if Kamala Harris is probably thinking of backstabbing Biden and so on, they're always worried that, oh, this guy still may have his teeth, and it will be the Roman equivalent, the American equivalent of this Roman reaction.
And even if Biden is not Tiberius in Capri, if what's the name of his house? Where is his house? Where he always spends his weekends?
In Delaware, I think. Right?
Where in Delaware? I forgot the name. Anyhow, even if Delaware is not, even if Biden in Delaware is not Tiberius in Capri, which means he's genuinely senile and incapable of fight, there's always the chance that Kamala Harris needs to consider, and everybody else who might want to replace Biden, that Biden is not as feeble-minded as he is physically feeble. Look, and the footage that we saw, it's bad. It's very bad. But all in all, his point is that he has somewhat improved the quality of healthcare in the United States, which is a contestable. It's a contestable point, but it is a point. It is a coherent point.
I'm somewhat impressed by your powers of detective work. They were able to cull something out of that. A few sentences.
It's definitely said in a way a confused old man would say it. Very stream of conscience. But we're not talking. He's not in a situation in which he is sitting in his armchair, staring into the distance with drool coming out of his mouth. He's not there yet. But my problem is, and the problem with most of the American people is, he clearly will be there in 4 years.
Hmm. Well, which actually brings us to the cover-up, because if he gets reelected, they will have every incentive to double down on how they present him to the public. Yes. And that actually brings me to another emperor that I want to just briefly mention, was himself very sharp, but considered himself very old, and that was Augustus. Augustus was really old, and he was the longest emperor of all time. Definitely Roman emperor, possibly including Eastern. Especially if you include his earlier part when he was part of the Second Triumvirate. Yeah. So Augustus, towards the end of his career, as Suetonius describes it, was really embarrassed about being seen in public because he knew he looked like kind of a very old man, and he kind of stayed indoors and stayed out of the public spotlight and had very carefully choreographed appearances because he knew he looked like a very old man, even if, let's say, he was entirely sharp.
Yes, and we need to consider because Suetonius is a strange source, because on one hand, it's he's very, very gossipy. On the other hand, we don't know how much of it is spin. It's basically Suetonius is writing out of the equivalent of the New York Times archive. Basically, imagine some.
So he's a New York Post reporter writing out of the New York Times archive.
Essentially, yes. It's a New York Post reporter writing constructing a history out of the New York Times archive, which means you don't know how much of it is imperial propaganda. Which means it's quite possible that Augustus was senile towards the end of his life, and the thing about him being insecure about his appearance as well, being completely sharp, is the type of stuff that we saw out of the media up until 5 minutes ago, and that's of course possible. It's also possible that he's absolutely correct, that he has the inside scoop that all of Augustus' appearances were choreographed because he was feeble but not feeble-minded. So this is a good question. But the real question is, when the emperor is not capable to carry out his duties, what happens to the court? Because the White House is very much like an imperial Roman court at this point, in the way it functions, which means you have the president's wife, you have his various secretaries and liaisons, etc., etc., etc. They're all loitering around his in the White House, which doubles as his official residence and as his main office location, and proximity to his physical proximity plays a huge role, and which of course makes the first lady that much important. Even for example, the first lady has no constitutional roles in our system, but everybody agrees that first ladies have much more influence on presidential policies than the vice president. Especially when the vice president and the president don't tend to look eye to eye, which I think we can safely say that situation with the last two presidents.
But especially this one, who
Yes.
the current vice president called her boss, Kamala, called Biden a racist or thereabouts when they were having a primary debate.
Yes.
So, if we have another Roman example, we'll do that. But let me just go and give a couple minute peruse of an article I was reading about the mention of the Byzantine Empire. And I'm not going to go line by line, but let me just cover. They cover some 7 high-profile cases from Justin I and Justinian I. Now, Justinian I, possibly the greatest Byzantine emperor on the lists, possibly. We have Constantine VIII, we have Michael IV, or Michael VI rather. Some of these are great emperors, but by the time they're passing away, they're 75, 80, 83, and so on. Let me give you a few of the symptoms that these 7 emperors and 1 empress of that list had in common. So this is the sort of things that their reign was described in terms of. 1. Deteriorated ability to understand state of matters. Delay in critical decisions. Inability to carry out his duties. The generation of systems, natural degeneration. This one on Constantine VIII. He married his daughter to a married person. Oh, I hate when that one happens. Passionate about poison making, neglecting sleep. Lack of stability, ignorant of public affairs, neglecting her office obligations, obviously talking about Zoe. Abandoning her personal care, dressing and bathing. Gosh. Apathy, hand tremor, deafness. Michael VI. Ignorant of state affairs, degenerated physical ability, apathy, motor problems, laziness, going on to others, not caring about state affairs, impairment of mental functions, indifferent and unconcerned. I feel like a good many of these we could see now, or we will see in the future, with our current president.
Yeah, I mean, look, even people who don't suffer from a specific degenerative disease in old age, such as Alzheimer's, old people tend to develop certain type of behavior, indifference, because they feel they feel that towards the end of his life they feel the feebleness of their bodies. So they feel like, okay, what's the point of all this, etc. I call it the Ecclesiastes syndrome. Tremors, indifference, confusion. Even if you don't have dementia or Alzheimer's, it's very, very common, especially as delay in critical decisions, such as Justin I, because old people are both stubborn and indecisive.
A paradoxical but dangerous combination.
It's a paradox. They're indecisive because they feel the burden of their age, and they are afraid to get an unwise decision, especially as they are increasingly isolated from the world outside, the circle of people younger than them that surrounds them, and in whose ability they don't have really. They're not really confident.
They don't have faith in, right?
Exactly. Thank you. And of course, stubbornness, inability to carry out his duties. That's just That's natural. We have.
Isaac and I are looking at this current historical list.
The generation of whole system, natural generation, marry his daughter to a married officer. Yeah, he probably forgot he was married already. Passionate about poison making. Now, poison in Greek, by the way, is pharma, is pharmakon. So it might be he became increasingly obsessed with medicine. Which means increasingly she Empress Zoe, increasingly got obsessed with her own health.
So some of these are physical impairments, and it has been pointed out by many that Joe Biden's shuffling off stage and on stage has deteriorated over time, and that 2 or 3 of the things that were commented on was his very placid looking face, his wandering off eye, steer, 1,000-yard steer, but not the focus steer at Jake Tapper, but looking at somewhere else in the crowd, even though there was no one else in the crowd.
Yeah, it's natural confusion.
And at some points, mouth being agape.
Yeah, even if you assume best case scenario, which means that he does not suffer from any specific degenerative disease. We are clearly talking about someone who is clearly starting to the long journey downhill.
Now let's bring a pointed question about our current president that is connected with the historical example. Obviously, we have no TV cameras and so on back in the day. So how much of this is an indictment of the current American public? Whereas a Roman or Byzantine emperor could successfully choreograph his movements so that the public is not aware. Although over here in our list we see that Justin I did have his citizens of the laughing at him, so they knew what was up. But you could have a situation where you have a Byzantine rule, there are no leaks, everything has a well choreographed, and you have a veneer of stability, and no one in the empire, especially if you don't live in the imperial city and don't know the imperial gossip, knows about it. Whereas today, everyone has a TV. You see the president on a daily basis on television, and you kind of have the government has to lie to you, but you also have to lie to yourself. Whereas in the past, you didn't have that.
That's a good question. The thing is, Roman and Byzantine emperors rule through auctoritas, which means through the personal display of authority, which means they have to be constantly in the public eye, not just in front of the officers and officials and etc., etc., etc. They have to be in the public eye. They have to go about town doing things and looking imperial and looking forceful. Therefore, that's why we have more. That's why we have more information about. That's why we have so much information about Byzantine emperors going downhill, compared to now Roman emperors in this stage would be replaced by someone. Byzantine emperors who rule over a different type of an empire would not be replaced because they have some sort of divine right legitimacy. But the historians will be aware of it, and because of the Christian attitude of the Byzantines, which they see bad emperors as a calamity from God, that we have to forbear until the good Lord sends us a new and better emperor, and that can be done either through a palace revolution, through a military coup, or through the death of the old man dying. That's why we know more about Byzantine emperors' mental condition towards the end of their life. The American president does not rule either through a divine right or through personal auctoritas. The American president rules he functions as the chief executive through a constitutional mandate. He does not need to be in the public eye because while even the Byzantine Empire retained the idea that the will of the people is expressed through popular assemblies or through or even through a mob. In our democracy, we believe that the popular will is expressed through Congress. Congress have been in the last few decades very compliant, at least when the president is of your side of Congress, and our senators. And essentially, the president can and will, due to advancement in communication technology, he's capable of just sending out his diktats to his underlings by letter or by in textual manner, and even by a phone call in which he can sound capable. There's no need for anyone except for the inner circle to see him at his worst. If you are a Roman or Byzantine emperor, you have to be out all the time. Only Augustus and Tiberius could be a hidden emperor, and that's because they ruled for so long and with such a power that everybody was afraid to topple them off. They already were beyond the display stage. They did not need to display themselves to the city of Rome anymore in their old age. This was not the situation with the average Byzantine emperor.
So, Biden, for example, famously has not done a solo press conference in the last 6 months.
Yes.
So, your point, I think, is well made about being out. However, even the events that he has done in the public eye that has gone on TV should have given some indication to a watching public.
And the public has been whispering for quite some time. The thing is, the public has been looking at the alternative, and the public is saying, "I'll take the senile old man over that crazy person, who may or may be who is who over the old crazy person, because the old crazy person will be senile in a few years. At least those are the chances, and he's already demented."
In a scenario where, let's say, Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley was candidate, I would be so bold as to assume that maybe that would shave off a few points from Biden, but it's not like he would get 0%. I feel like he would still have a very close race, despite all of what we said. Or do you disagree with that?
I don't know. Of course, he will not get zero electoral votes, but he would have no realistic chance. And look, I blame the Republican Party as much as I blame the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party believe that if they push the Republican Party to nominate Trump, that will be easier for them to nominate Biden to another term. The Republican Party not only swallowed the debate, the Republican Party then, after the primaries were essentially over, turned itself into part of the Trump organization, into the Trump meta organization. It's the RNC is now run by Lara Trump, his daughter-in-law. He is it essentially is no longer a political party. And I'm saying like this: I'll take this podcast does not endorse does not make political endorsements. But personally, if I have to choose which administration will be more dangerous, I'll take the one in which there is no central will, and in which you have the equivalent of Byzantine quarters joking for position, and therefore too preoccupied to do anything too dangerous, over the one in which you have at the center the will of one very vindictive, very angry, and maybe not completely sane individual.
Well, who do you think is actually going to win?
I don't make predictions at this point. I'm completely disappointed in everybody. I'm completely disappointed in both parties and in all media organizations. Good job, everyone. You failed You failed America.
Well, I think that there is, as I said in the beginning, I think there's a fair chance they did not drop Biden. I think it's better than even. And if it's a Trump versus Biden head-to-head, and assuming the media does not wake up in a week from now, in the morning after reaction, and say, "Oh my goodness, how could we have deserted our dear, illustrious president Biden? We have to go back to closing ranks around him with a Testito formation." But assuming that does not happen, then Biden is finished, because Biden required the media to take him over the finish line, and in a normal world that would have happened. That's not going to happen. My follow-up prediction is, if in fact Trump wins, you're going to see very little of that fear of manifestation and vindictiveness. I actually think it's going to be much ado about nothing the next 4 years. There will be a lot of stymieing in courts. There will be a lot of some stymieing in Congress. I actually think that it will be kind of dull in some ways. In fact, duller than the first term. The first term had one piece of legislation that was really significant, and that was the tax legislation and so on.
Yes.
There will probably be something like that, probably having to do with taxes, because if there's one thing to get the all Republican Party to agree on, it's not immigration even, it's not foreign policy, it's not AI, it's cutting taxes.
Yes, which is at this point.
So they'll probably cut
at this point
the marginal rate from what is it now, 21?
Whatever.
Probably
at
to 17 or 15.
At this point, it's a Pavlovian action. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to govern. We have no idea what we are doing here. So let's just cut taxes, because that always seems to make people happy.
I mean, cutting taxes is always a wonderful idea.
Yes.
Not stealing as much money from people as you've been doing hitherto.
Yeah, but if you end up the spending on deficit, you're just stealing from them in another way.
That's true. Stealing is always bad, no matter how you do it.
Yes. So as long, look, my taxes are too high. I guess everybody would agree to that. But but I understand that I cannot pay less taxes unless the government spends less of my money, because otherwise I'll pay this tax in another manner. So nobody has a so the conclusion is nobody has a plan, nobody is thinking of a plan, nobody knows how to govern, nobody plans on how to govern. The American our political class have failed us, the American people, and the sooner we understand it, the better, at least at the highest level. Yes, both parties have a wonderful bench. We mentioned all those Democratic governors that are pretty moderate and pretty viable as national candidates. We already mentioned at least two of some at least of palatable options that the American people have from the Republican bench, and there are many, but it appears that the parties are demented and senile, and maybe it's time to a new party system. I'm not giving up on America. The American people are wise, sensible, full with patriotism and goodness and virtue and grace. But their parties but the Democratic Party and the Republican Party needs either a thorough reform or they need to go. Have a good day.
Thank you, Isaac, for ending off on an optimistic note. We will try to return to you in the future.
More or Tiran.